Perhaps you'll get a notification after the fact if you graduated. You can stand. I'm going to recommend that you also come into the table closer to Lauren, just because I can't even put you in the camera. Sure, where Matt is. Matt is cleverly out of the camera. This is a good strategy if you're in the book 1984, which I believe you are.
I could also be the only man in that book.
I decided to record this round so that you would have extra demos set for the fall.
In the spring afterwards.
And the spring afterwards. So should flow this out the same way that I was showing you to flow out things last time. Just give a page to every op case position, and then as they're getting ready to speak, organize the pages in the order that they're going to say them. Do you all wait a couple more minutes before you're ready to go, or are you pretty close?
I'm ready.
I'm good.
I think we're good.
And they are talking a lot slower than they normally do.
Or do I have to stand?
I would recommend, yeah, let's do that.
We need debating on this phone. And or my computer.
6 minutes, right?
Yep, 6 minutes.
So, what is the acronym?
I am not the app, so I cannot answer that question, but I have made a round folder that we could use.
Speech drop.
We could all use the speech drop.
I'll do that real quick. Okay. Lower uppercase A, uppercase K, lowercase n, lowercase d, uppercase H, lowercase d.
So that's, if you want it on your devices, drop.net, 6 characters. But I'll just show it up here too.
Can you go to it up there one more time?
All right, cool.
Good to go? You ready?
All right. The Loeffler and Fry decisions are woefully insufficient to provide legal context for regulation of plea bargaining. We have an ethical obligation to make the law better. Alshler 13. Even if Loeffler and Fry had not touched the question of remedy, they would not warrant the high plea dominated systems make justice dependent on the quality of counsel. Loeffler and Fry can neither guarantee effective legal representation in the plea negotiations process nor do much to make it more likely, defenses of plea negotiation depend on assumptions. Defendants will be well represented. Advising a client to enter a plea agreement can never be proven wrong, can always imagine the outcome of a trial would have been worse. The defendant is almost certain to lose. Failing to convey critical info entitle a client to relieve self-interested advice to plead guilty. Inept negotiating and horrendous predictions, however, will not suffice. Although lawyer pocketed his client's cash without helping him, Lafler and Fry will not touch him. Judicial decisions cannot significantly ameliorate the problem of effective self-interest lawyering in the plea negotiation process. Plan. The U.S. criminal justice system should strengthen the due process clause to restrict plea bargaining, enforce transparency, and apply a uniform sentencing discount to prosecutors for the purposes of plea bargainings on dissolvency. Due process clause and fundamental fairness levels the power imbalance between prosecutors and defendants, securing durable regulations. Capers 18. The court never disavowed fundamental fairness approach can be seen in Holmes v. South Carolina. Due process clause guaranteeing criminal defendants a meaningful opportunity to present a complete defense. Read in the requirement confession to be voluntary. A due process violation can exist independent of any trial. Constitutional regulation through freestanding due process extends to every phase. It is at the plea bargaining stage that due process clause is the dominant source of regulation, establishes minimal info given to the defendant prior to his plea factual basis for the plea where pressures can be imposed without rendering plea voluntary, determines a plea agreement which can be broken and require relief or plea bargain breached by the prosecutor or court. Even if the court is not initially receptive, court arguments should be made, reinvigorate and take seriously the due process clause, modify the federal system, deciding terms handled by a separate team of attorneys working with some success in Milwaukee. Federal judges can apply a uniform sentencing discount, demand something similar of prosecutors, and only the plan resolves unequal bargaining power. That's key to the plea bargaining and criminal justice writ large. Capers 18. The time to prohibit has passed. We can make the plea bargaining less awful. Oversight prosecutors, we ask what kind of plea offers are fundamentally unfair. It is not plea bargaining that is the problem. Unequal bargaining power in the absence of meaningful regulation, something must be done. Mass incarceration is largely attributable to prosecutors. We should think about how our steps fit in the larger goal of fixing the system. To reject all plea offers would be backlash. Legislators respond by making the trial penalty even more draconian. Instead of crashing the system, a slow down instead would reduce the prosecutor's return while increasing resources, shift the balance of power. Next is the innocence advantage. Plea bargaining pressures innocent defendants to plead guilty and exaggerate disparities. Finley et al. 22. Plea bargaining has a serious innocence problem. Pressure to take a plea induce innocent people to plead guilty. Empirical data confirmed. Recent years show even higher, 44% of known exonerations in 2015. These surely represent a vast undercounting innocence problem, also exacerbates disparities. Women, youth, racialized, and other disadvantaged, including those with disabilities at a particular risk. Take the case of Carrie Cook. Cook was tried 3 times in death sentences, third were reversed in 1996 because of police and prosecutorial misconduct. Prosecutor responded offering a plea bargain 2 months after DNA testing proved his actual innocence, and defendants are uniquely vulnerable in the plea bargaining process. Prefer our studies more real world than negative hypotheticals. Edkins 13. Professor Convoy's mass exoneration cases, 9 out of 10 guilty accepted deal, and over half of innocent individuals selected the bargain over trial support that plea bargaining's innocence problem affected more than just an isolated few. The well over half of the innocent participants, regardless of sentencing, were willing to falsely admit guilt for reduced punishment. When study participants are placed in a real bargaining situations persisted with accurate info, innocent individuals are highly risk adverse. Study participants simply wanted to go home. Not only differentials lead felony defendants to falsely condemn themselves, but also misdemeanor defendants based on the factors wholly distinct from factual guilt. Diagnostically indicates that innocent defendants may be more vulnerable to coercion in plea bargaining, and plea bargaining non-transparency specifically promotes coercion and frustrates criminal justice reform. Turner 21. Concealing this disparate treatment, there are no searchable databases. Defense attorneys often do not know the going rate. They cannot be sure whether an offer is reasonable and consistent with the norm. Lack of transparency allows disparate treatment to remain hidden. Similarly situated defendants are not treated consistently in plea bargaining on the basis of wealth and race. Better documentation and transparency measures are necessary to address unequal treatment. It's difficult to ensure defendants are receiving effective assistance. If bargaining occurs off the record, defense attorneys are likely to be less effective in negotiating, disguising the trial penalty. Defendants are frequently penalized for exercising their Sixth Amendment right to the penalty can be significant. Until records are available, we cannot determine with precision the size of the trial penalties. Parties conceal facts to achieve a mutually agreed upon result, undermining victims' ability to provide input. Consider Epstein relying on political connections, wealth, and higher power attorneys. Epstein was able to negotiate a plea deal that would spare him from federal prosecution and net him a lenient sentence. Cut the card there. Enhancing transparency solves without overburdening the criminal justice system. Turner 21. Broader transparency in plea bargaining promises to make the processes fairer, more truthful, more legitimate without unduly burdening the criminal justice system. Transparency is not all or nothing, requiring that plea agreements can be written in the record on the record, easiest, most straightforward, adopted broadly would enhance predictability, fairness, and public understanding.
Ready for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. My first question is about the plan text. It says that we should restrict plea bargaining. Does that mean that pleas still occur? And how many of those pleas would still occur post plan?
That's Carson question.
So any pleas that would be seen as coercive or, unequal to those who are currently experiencing disparities within the plea bargaining process would not be allowed to get pleas.
How do we know if things are unequal or if there is coercion going on?
We've read a piece of Turner evidence or Edkins evidence that discusses studies between which individuals are being selected for plea bargaining trials and how over half of those of them are innocent and coercive. So those would not be allowed.
The Edkins evidence just says that all plea bargains are coercive though, because of the unequal power between the prosecutor and the defendant.
The problem within that, though, is those who are innocent participants of those will falsely admit guilt to reduce their punishment.
I guess I do want to talk about that next. Why do innocent people accept plea deals when they could just go to court and prove?
Yeah, so that was the Edkins evidence. It talks about how study participants just wanted to go home, and so they would do anything that would allow them to shorten their sentence or shorten their punishment and just go home, even if it meant admitting like false guilt to like a crime that they did not commit.
But if they go to jail as a result of the plea bargain, why is that?
They'd be going to jail for less time than if they did not take the plea bargain, which means that they just wanted to be able to go home as fast as possible.
Okay.
And so that means that they would take coercive deals, if they knew that they were.
Why is them winning the court case if they're innocent, not going home the fastest?
Yeah, because these people already do not touch the criminal justice system, and putting them through a process when they're literally given a free ticket to be you can just go home faster, they would take that instead.
Thanks. Yep, I know. Okay, there, the order is 2 off case. And then it's solvency and then the case proper.
Okay, is everybody good?
Yep.
Oh.
Cross is only 2 minutes.
Oh, for real?
Yes.
First is the disadvantage. Plea bargaining represents 97% of cases. The act makes the courts grind to a halt, while 97% of federal cases are settled by plea bargain through access to a public trial. The amendment taking a plea proposes that possibility. The plea became a release valve for mounting caseloads. Basic economics support their use. Trials are expensive and proactive. 2 rational parties can cheaply and quickly come to an agreeable outcome, and the absence that has a litany of delays in the plea bargaining process, so that even if not a single person takes a new trial, things like the judges having to evaluate every single case, means that they create a big backlog, and restriction on plea bargaining causes a crash of resources, complete slowdown in the system. While 17, in theory, prosecutors would simply stop offering deals. That would be that through a massive influx of trials would jam the courts, discuss defendants deliberately going to trial and cracking the courts as a form of resistance, and that turns the entire affirmative people who who need to face justice are permitted to remain free and cause more danger longer, while innocents who are awaiting trial are forced to remain in jail. Also destroys the public defense system. They cannot keep up with the influx of trials that prevents the ability of courts to exact justice and makes the applicant 0% risk of solvency. And next is the unbundling counter plan. The United States federal government should mandate an unbundling of criminal trial rights, and the counterplan solves bed. It creates fairer deals, streamlines cases, and leads to more sentencing, less sentencing overall, while increasing transparency and decreasing resource burden. For 415, there are two paths an accused could go: elective trial involving or invoking a bundle of procedural protections, or plea bargaining. Declining to contest guilt and trading this bundle of rights for leniency at sentencing. Its choice is largely illusory. Defendants can unbundle their jury trial rights and trade them piecemeal, consenting to streamline trial procedure to reduce sentencing exposure. A new universe of potential bargaining options opens up. Bargain for leniency, consenting to be tried by a 6-person jury, and it's definitely preferable. Increases benefits for defendants and reduces agency costs. For 415. By offering cheaper, streamlined adjudication, and bundling bargaining makes genuine adversarial testing more common. Streamlined trials will be more accurate, which reduces the social cost, enhance the criminal law deterrent effect. Second, plea bargaining involves serious agency costs. Adjudication makes defensive prosecutor performance more visible and thus more accountable, reducing agency costs. The additional adjudications promote democratic values, having more adjudication strengthen the bargaining position of defendants, nudging plea bargaining closer to the law of shadow. And if the outcries of affirmative proof, they aren't topical, since the counterplan expands plea bargaining, whereas topical apps must restrict that. The affirmative is just a restriction on pleas. Vote negative on TV that makes it possible to get their counterplans under any case defense, since predicated off plea bargaining changes, not trial changes. And now the case proper. First is solvency. There is no right to leniency. The app complaint is with the law in question, not plea bargaining. Complaint 20. The conclusion: plea bargaining creates a punishment for defendants. The flawed point of view, a trial is not retaliatory, rather a trial is the result or natural result of the defendant being charged with a crime. It is more accurate to view the plea offer as a gracious alternative, and it's definitely not coercive. Increases options for defendants. Conflict 20. Pleas are required to be made knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily. A highly generous plea offer does not permit the defendant's acceptance of a plea to be unknowing, unintelligent, or involuntary. Just as someone who accepts a generous offer for a house, anyone who purported to be advocating on behalf by proposing a ban on such generous real estate offers will be viewed with great skepticism. It could also be reduced by the practice of less generous plea offers. The fact that less generous plea offers will be viewed as highly negative illustrates how the issue of disparity is ultimately illusory, and people who view themselves as innocents don't even accept pleas. Conflict 20. Innocent people accepting pleas is often overstated. Studies show innocent defendants are more likely to insist on trial. Perception of fairness helps explain this. They are willing to risk to acquire the only fair outcome and acquittal. And some defendants reject a plea offer on the principled ground that admitting to a crime is a lie. Another reason is the innocence effect. Innocent defendants are more confident that a trial will reveal the truth of their innocence, and plea bargaining helps innocent people. The app issued with innocent convictions are not specific to plea bargaining, but the system writ large. Conflict 20. Many criticize plea bargaining that is a result of innocent accepting pleas have an overly simplistic view. There are certainly innocent defendants who more nuanced. This argument presumes the defendant is usually the only party involved who knows with certainty if he is innocent. The difference between innocence and guilt is so amorphous, even the defendant himself does not know if he is innocent. If a crime requires malice of forethought, it could be ultimately unknowable whether his state of mind meets this requirement. Issue of probability of guilt and probability of a conviction are not correlated. Excluded evidence, particular judges, defendants' legal representation, demographics of the jury pool, and availability of witness are all variables that affect the likelihood of conviction independent of actual innocence. And the power dynamic is a mutually beneficial relationship. Power dynamic would exist with or without pleas. Conflict 20. It is true that plea bargaining prosecutors might inappropriately consider factors such as their own conviction rate. It is unclear how abolishing plea bargaining would eliminate this behavior. Absent plea bargaining, a prosecutor with low probability of success would likewise be incentivized to drop the charges. Prosecutors face ample political accountability for their decisions. It would make little sense to give equivalent plea offers. It would be even worse to offer less lenient plea offers to those defendants with higher probabilities of acquittal. And the issue is the system. Please help hedge against that. Conklin 20. It is inaccurate to say Hayes was punished for not accepting a plea offer. Rather, he was punished for violating the Kentucky Habitual Criminal Act. If punishment was too severe, issues lie with the sentencing guidelines under the act, not with the plea that offers Hayes a choice choose to reject. People are free to advocate for reduction in their sentencing guidelines rather than showing the harms of a plea offer. It demonstrates the value of plea offers. And Alaska proved that moving away from the status quo fails. Conklin 20. The Alaska experiment was never implemented long term. The experiment was a failure, not a success. Even Alaska maintained an informal plea bargaining process, remained in the understanding that a guilty plea would result in significantly lighter sentencing.
Okay. Okay. Is the counterclaim conditional?
Yeah.
What does unbundling criminal trial rights look like?
It means that the status quo is that there are certain rights that people cannot give up because the courts think that they are inalienable and that they have to exist no matter what. The counterclaim changes that and allows defendants to be able to give up rights such as the right to a full trial or the right to a jury trial in different numbers. They can accept a jury trial of 4 people in order for more leniency from the actual prosecutor. So it does things like that.
Makes sense.
I agree.
The Conklin evidence, it says that that pleas offers are just gracious alternatives. How is it gracious if people are being coerced in the status quo?
I think that the other piece of Conklin evidence does a good job of explaining why that sort of coercive tendency is maybe not only a result of the current system, but not like inherent to the plea bargaining process, because we have the ability to have prosecutors give more gracious offers like through the counterclaim, which resolves the issue of coercion because we are using coercion in a positive way.
There's still coercion. Okay.
Sure.
Cool. The disadvantage, I guess, how many pleas do we have to restrict in order for the system to shut down?
It's not necessarily a question of X number of pleas, but rather the way in which pleas are heard and offered. The first piece of Walsh evidence talks about how plea bargains are 97% of cases in the criminal justice system. So even if we were only able to see like a 1% or a 10% reduction, that would still drastically hurt the entire system because those are hundreds of thousands of cases. Thanks.
Is everyone good? It'll be the case, the unbundling counterplan, and then the court collected set. The plan reinvigorates the due process clause at the federal level, provisions for transparency, and establishes a uniform sentencing discount for prosecutors, which solves for 3 reasons. First is the due process claims enable stricter regulation of plea bargains, establishing what renders a plea involuntary and determining what defendants receive a meaningful opportunity to present when a defense comes. That's our Capers evidence. Second, the transparency requirements provide oversight and streamline the opportunities for due process regulation. And third, A uniform sentencing discount coupled with due process regulations shifts the balance of power, offering an opportunity to reduce prosecutor return from bargains while increasing resources to decrease plea rates. That's key to sustainable solvency. This also moves in the direction of resolving mass incarceration. The negative did not read a piece of evidence on the solvency question, so if we win that plea bargains are bad, you should feel comfortable voting in affirmation. Now let's talk about our advantage. Plea bargaining has a significant innocence problem. Since 1989, guilty pleas make up for nearly 22% of wrongful convictions that we know of, and these have become consistently higher in the past decade, ranging from 22% to a high of 44%. Furthermore, these are undercounted due to the lack of transparency, and the innocence problems also exacerbates criminal justice disparities. That's our Finley evidence. Defendants are risk averse, and diagnostically results indicate that the real world defendants are more vulnerable in negotiations than almost any other stage of the process, which means defendants are uniquely likely to be coerced in the status quo. That's our Edkins evidence. But the plan makes plea bargaining more transparent and disincentivizes and punishes prosecutors prosecutorial misconduct, promotes victims' inputs, and removes structural barriers to database criminal justice reform. Let's talk about their first argument where they talk about how there's no right leniency. This is just saying that plea bargains also exist in the status quo, which we also agree. They exist in the status quo and they are bad because they increase the disparities in the status quo within the criminal justice system. Their next argument is that it's not coercive, but we have an entire advantage with 4 great pieces of evidence on how coercive the plea bargaining process is. Remember, people are uniquely vulnerable in the discussion process of whether to take a plea or not. And that leads to pleas being more coercive because they just want to get home fast and they fear going into the criminal justice system for longer periods of time. Their next 3 arguments are just about the power dynamic within the plea bargains. So you can group them. Remember Edkins and Turner evidence, which says which cites many studies and says that over 50% suggest that plea bargains are coercive in the status quo. And that number is even underreported because of the lack of transparency within the system. Their last argument is that it didn't work in Alaska, but that's not conducive to the entire United States with the entire federal government acting as opposed to a singular state. Now let's go to the counterplan. Our first argument is permutation to both. You should read the Rappaport evidence. It lists a bunch of reasons why plea bargains are bad, which means we could do both restrict plea bargain usage and unbundle criminal trial rights. The second argument is permutation to the plan and then the counterplan. Establishing due process first will also help amplify perm solvency. Third, permutations are questions of mutual exclusivity, not a question of topicality. They need to read an interpretation of the topic that the 1AC violates in order for them to garner offense on this topicality argument. The 1AC does restrict pleas by limiting how often pleas occur. And fourth is that there's a power imbalance to that. The 1AC Capers evidence is really good here. Resolving unequal bargaining power is the critical internal link. It's the only one we need to win in order to solve, and the counterplan does not solve this. Our next argument is there's a transparency dissent. Public and judicial review discourages prosecutors from improper negotiating tactics. That's key to procedural integrity and working to solve the problems of mass incarceration. And 6, there's a due process clause dissent. The first piece of Capers evidence is good here. Discusses how due process is dominant and source of regulation during the plea bargaining process. Without strengthening the due process clause, there's a terminal solvency deficit because it maintains the status quo where defendants are almost certain to lose challenges made for poor bargaining practices. That's the Alsher evidence. And 7, there's no chance of inroads to criminal justice reform. The 1AC Capers and Turner transparency evidence specifically talks about how the plan enables criminal justice reform through data collection and rebalancing the power dynamic. Unbundling fails to do that. Now let's go to the court, their last argument, which is the court called dissent. 1, the case outweighs. The plan prevents thousands of innocent people's convictions, shifts balance of power of the prosecutors and conduct, and removes structural barriers to criminal justice reform. Second, it's stumped by individual successes of plans in the states, i.e. Milwaukee specifically is referenced in the first Capers card, showing that regulation should have linked to the claim if it were true. And third, the strength of their link is insufficient. The 1AC Turner evidence says that the 1AC can enhance transparency without unduly burdening the criminal justice system. And fourth, do not buy into the negatives over-exaggerating the 1AC crashing the system. Our 1AC Capers evidence is very explicit about how the plan as a slow down for plea bargaining, not a wholesale ban. Neither the courts nor prosecutor offices will be overburdened by the plan, especially since the latter still gets a net gain in resources to allocate to a trial. And fifth, the dissad does not turn the case. In fact, the case turns the dissad. People are unjustly prosecuted in the status quo for plea bargains, which exacerbates disparities in the status quo, meaning the only way to resolve justice is by passing the affirmative plan. Additionally, plea bargains set the stage for broader coercion within the criminal justice system. This harms the ability to create broader criminal justice reform due to the inability to guarantee transparency in the sentencing system. Overall, the negative has not sufficiently attacked the solvency of the affirmative, and we have won that plea bargains are on net bad because of their coercion and they increase disparities within the criminal justice system. If you think so too, we strongly recommend a ballot and vote for affirmation.
Very good for profit.
Yeah.
How does the app reduce like prosecutor returns from getting people to accept plea bargains?
What do you mean by prosecutor returns?
Yeah, they're financially incentivized to get through more cases.
Sure. So we just reduce the plea bargaining process, so they just won't get those returns.
Okay, I guess I'm curious about so there are no plea bargains post-act?
Well, they're not necessarily zero plea bargains. We just think that the process is significantly reduced, and we think it's much more transparent, which is a
How is it
primary issue.
significant?
Well, the one I see says we will restrict plea bargains. That number is just a reduction in the use of plea bargains.
For sure. How does the app, let's talk about the permutation. The app says restrict. Restrict plea bargain, and you were saying we should increase bargaining rights through unbundling. Explain the premise.
Well, you can just restrict plea bargains, and you can also unbundle criminal trial rights.
Okay, but that means that you have to increase the ability of people to engage in plea bargains through accepting the counter.
You don't have to unbundle, you don't have to have plea bargains to unbundle criminal trial rights.
Okay. How many plea bargain cases are there now?
3,876,305.
That is the
Based on yesterday.
I don't think that's real.
case turn, how does justice solve court clog?
How does justice solve court clog? So yeah, the terminal impact of the court clog disadvantage is that there's injustice that will occur within the system because people can't get to court. But we've read pieces of evidence how people are already unjustly being criminalized in the status quo. And in fact, we've read a broader piece of Turner evidence that says without reforming plea bargains, broader criminal justice reform is also
But
challenging.
we're talking about two different types of injustice through like not being able to access the court and having like bad access to the court here. How does the app?
We think
solve-
both of those are terrible, but we should focus on the Turner evidence, which says that the 1AC is critical to broader criminal justice reform.
How does
which-
the app result in broad criminal justice reform?
Yes, so the Turner evidence says that due to the massive amount of untransparency within the plea bargaining process, it's harder to trust criminal justice reform within things like sentencing and other things of those nature. So tackling one problem can start the wheels to other problems.
Okay, we have 4 minutes, so we am starting now.
You may not have seen some structure before, but it works for that in the actual work file. Thing and FALD. Yeah.
3 minutes left. The order will be the unbundling kind of plan, and then the court clog disadvantage.
It was
Yep. No problem with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually gonna be the 1 AR.
It's in there. Is everybody ready? The counter plan and then the dispatch. Now is everybody ready? Go ahead. Start. The counterplan is able to resolve 100% of the affirmative and more. Unbundling rights allows defendants and prosecutors to reach an equilibrium where innocent persons are not forced to admit guilt while still not facing severe retaliation, and prosecutors are unable to waste the countless resources that they are in the status quo. It's able to solve for the innocent problem that the 1AC describes because it offers even better pleas for them or conditional pleas that can be used. It gives people who view themselves as innocent another option without forcing it upon them. And it solves their trial penalties arguments because there isn't a right to leniency at trials, but it leads to less overall sentencing and better reforms that ensures the defendants are not punished at all. For instance, a defendant can consent to a 6-person jury, which makes the burden on the court 50% lower and still ensures that there is due process protection to the accused. And unbundling avoids court, it preserves some pleas, but also alleviates the AF issues. Walsh and 17. The alternative is more trials. Half step has long been practiced in bench trials. According to our guide, dramatically shorten the length of the proceedings. The solution in Philadelphia is very good, given the alternatives. This allows for far more trials than we see in other jurisdictions. And they have conceded all of the internal net benefits as well. The 1C Rappaport evidence describes how unbundling would lead to fewer agency costs for both the prosecutor and the defender, while increasing the ability to exercise rights for the defendant and increase overall plea bargaining power from the prosecutor, which makes it more fair. I'll answer their solvency deficits here. First, they say that we're unable to resolve for transparency, but that's not the main issue because transparency is insufficient to be able to resolve different areas. Transparency cannot be able to resolve to be able to guarantee increased bargains, and it still strips away the ability for defendants to be able to bargain a larger amount of rights. Second, their power imbalance argument. We have answered this on case, and the counterclaim is able to resolve the power imbalance because it gives more tools to defendants, which restricts what the prosecutors are able to do, and it helps defendants get lower sentences, which makes it so that the power imbalance flips in favor of the defendant. Third, they say the due process clause, but we have also strengthened that via the counterclaim. It makes it so that there is a greater autonomy from the individual, which is a stronger link to due process. We have also indicted their claims about the DPC being the only important aspect of the plea process. The next arguments that I'll address are the perms. First, there's no perm do both. The 1C evidence is best on this question. Current plea bargaining or any future restriction on it maintains the all or nothing dynamic. Only by moving away from that understanding can unbundling be possible. And it competes and it's mutually exclusive. Half is an increase in restrictions on plea bargaining, whereas the CP is a decrease in restrictions on plea bargaining. The two cannot occur at the same level. It also links to the net benefit because it still maintains judges having to monitor, hear, and recommend every single plea that is brought in front of them. And only the counterclaim is able to solve for court quality. The binary plea bargaining fails, Rappaport and 15. A binary plea bargaining system prescribes a one-size-fits-all or every defendant, no matter how awkwardly the procedures fit the case. Unbundled bargaining moves us towards a system which procedures are tailored to meet the party's preference, promoting both defendant autonomy and efficient deployment of judicial and attorney resource. Streamlining some full-blown jury trials will conserve scarce resources, which can then be spent on additional trials. And even if you think there's some risk of the perm, the CP links less than the perm does to the dissad or the act by itself. And their final argument is perm to the plan and then the counterclaim. But that doesn't work because they're still mutually exclusive for the reasons that I've isolated above, since the act restricts plea bargaining, whereas the neg expands them. The disadvantage. First, the affirmative creates a crash in the court system because of an expansion towards trial cases rather than plea bargains. 97% of the status quo is represented by plea deals, which is much better because it keeps the courts unclogged. Even if only a small percent start going to trial rather than pleas, that means that one, the act doesn't solve anything since they're insufficient to be able to reduce pleas to solve. Or two, even just a few switching over to trials is sufficient because a single court case can take 50 hours to litigate from a prosecutor, which makes it impossible to deal with other issues, especially because of how few prosecutors there are right now. This comes first because preserving the court system is necessary to ensure that justice is handed out to individuals. And even if the act wins their entire case, you should still vote negative because without a functioning court system, innocents who are trapped in jail because of high cash bails are still going to remain in jail. That answers their arguments about case outweighing the dissad, and instead dissad outweighs the case. And even if you don't believe any of that, court clog hurts defendants the most because it ensures that individual public defenders are going to have a massive amount of cases that they have to deal with. And there's already a shortage of those public defenders in the status quo. The act makes that infinitely worse now, though, since defendants will be incentivized to go to trial, even if their case is unwinnable, which takes up valuable time the public defender could be used on someone whose case is actually winnable. And Their second argument is about the individual states, but one, the reasons that Alaska doesn't apply to the entire United States federal government is also why Milwaukee doesn't apply. And second, that is the brink that we're seeing right now. Milwaukee had much more lax restrictions where that didn't hurt overall pleas, whereas the AF is much more severe as a restriction. The link level arguments now. One, the AF mandates that there are numerous extra extensions of plea bargains. They're meant to be the fast option, but the AF requires that A, it's offered in writing, filed to the court, B, add it into the database and have prosecutors and defendants use that database, and C, mandate that judges then have to review each individual guilty plea to ensure that they're actually fair. And second, mandating judges review each plea causes a massive crash. Judges already have large dockets in the status quo, but the AF ensures that how now judges must add on an additional step and review each and every plea. That's necessary to see if the pleas would be coercive or not. Their only other argument is the link defense, but it's incorrect. It only speaks to filing it on record, and our links as above is that, but also that they mandate a judge review and then a re-review from the defense and prosecutors in order to ensure that it isn't coercive. The cross of the 1ACE says that they would know that they are or aren't coercive, but the only way to know that that is the case is to have a judge evaluate that, which would destroy the court system. Thanks. Good for cross.
Let's get started on the counterclaim. I'm going to talk about this Rappaport evidence that says that a binary plea bargaining fails. What kind of system would you describe the plea bargaining system in the United States right now?
I mean, in the status quo,
Yes.
lots of different things.
So it wouldn't be
The Rappaport evidence does say that the status quo is a binary plea bargaining, but also that the word would be affirmative. of the
Okay,
binary.
so if the status quo is a binary plea bargaining system and the Rappaport evidence has conceded that a binary plea bargaining system causes court clog, why is like the act all of a sudden making this court clog worse if court clog or it's already existing in the status quo?
The status quo is that there's court clog, but the issue is that it's not a linear impact. Rather, it's that every hour that it takes for there to be a court case to be heard is worse for people who are in jail because they're unable to afford their cash bail or because their public defenders are working with other individuals. It's not like we're already seeing court clog right now, but further instances of court clog will make that.
If court
infinitely
clog
worse.
is already happening right now, though, and the system is able to stay afloat, I just don't understand why we've never seen like the court system crash before in the past with like criminal justice reform. Why would all of a sudden plea bargaining when there's already court clog in the quo and there's been court clog forever?
Sure. The first is that I would say that the court system isn't really doing the best right now, which is kind of the uniqueness argument that we have made that says that the courts are struggling to keep up. The second is that the 1NC disad link talks about how 97% of the status quo are all specific to plea bargains. So if we even remove like 2% of plea bargains, that makes it so that now those like 20,000 or so cases that each take 50 hours to litigate would explode the ability of judges and public defenders and prosecutors to deal with the court system. And only the counterclaim is able to resolve that because it makes pleas happen faster. Thanks. Yeah. Hey, that was like 5 seconds. So it's 2:55 now.
Any more cards?
Maybe, I kind of doubt it. You're welcome. It's tea. Yeah, it's everybody good.
I am ready, man.
All right. Case, the applicants to mark and solving for the harms of the criminal justice system, not only will the removal of plea bargaining have little impact on the issues they've identified, but passing the affirmative will foreclose on the net good that plea bargaining has for the criminal justice system now. The first argument is that defendants are risk adverse. Yes, that is exactly the problem. They avoid the risk of going to jail by going to trial now with no evidence on how many people, quote, fear being in the criminal justice system for a long time means that you should prefer the negative explanation because it's more logical. The next thing is about this leniency argument, about how sure it exists in the status quo, but the laws now are definitely bad. Exactly. The onus of the problem should be on the SQUO failure, the SQUO laws that are not distributing bargaining power, which is the key internal link to all of the affirmatives offense. The bargaining system, which has redeeming qualities in the SQUO, is the entire 1 and C. The tiebreaker for the negative is that any advantage to maintaining the SQUO bargaining process is a negative ballot. And I'll do the coercive stuff now. The affirmative definitely doesn't solve this choice between, quote, Lucifer and Satan. It just means that they just push that choice back. Doing anything to just go home is still exactly what would happen if you believe the affirmative explanation, post removing the ability for them to bargain for a lesser sentence. Less jail does not equal solving the root of the problem. Quote, real CJR being needed, which is the biggest explanation that the affirmative gives about how they are going to resolve these sorts of structural problems with the criminal justice system now. But top level, you need to prefer the negative over the sort of interim solution of the affirmative. They have no real solvency for resulting in the types of broad reforms to solve all the big problems in the SQUO right now, like bad cops and the neoliberal institution of for-profit prisons and convictions. Cross-ex question 1 is really great here. The affirmative quote reduces the process to solve for things like financial incentives to convict for prosecutors. Don't believe that explanation though, because it's a very flimsy claim about quote building trust by taking away people's ability to go home and spend less time in jail, which makes no logical sense. The next argument is this sort of power dynamic stuff that innocent people generally do not accept plea bargains. There's almost no answer to this in the 2AC. The negative explanation is much more logical. People believe that they are innocent and believe that they will be acquitted when they go to trial. They fear taking a deal would be perjury since they're lying in their eyes, and the affirmative has no mechanism to solve for the sort of external factors like prosecutors caring about the conviction rate. There are infinite alt causes that overwhelming risk of affirmative solvency. The next thing is this sort of Alaska, Alaska example. And Alaska is definitely indicative of the overall federal strategy that you employ. You must, to solve the affirmative, you have to create massive structural changes which solve all of the factors that we've already talking about. Against the tiny interim solution of the affirmative means that there is no good affirmative ballot. The last thing I'll talk about is this sort of coercion argument. All of the affirmative's evidence is in the context of quote negative coercion. Only the counterplan is able to sort of refashion that impulse now towards positive methods where the ability to bargain still exists, but the affirmative is not the one distributing the power. It only takes that power away, which is the key internal link to being able to resolve any risk of this sort of trust building mechanism to result in broad criminal justice reform. Only through increasing bargaining power will the affirmative ever be able to result in the kind of changes that they think are necessary. 20 seconds, Sam. To bargain good if you want. I'll do solvency for a second. Strength and monitoring doesn't solve for their harms. Even if 100% truth, prosecutors are still at liberty to threaten unfavorable sentences with impunity. And judges are largely reliant on attorneys to tell them on info to make decisions. They don't change that with more transparency.
Yeah. 4 minutes starting now.
Maybe rather than 12 minutes past 4:45.
pleas to occur.
Fantastic. Yeah.
One 36 24.
How do I pull that timer on my laptop?
I don't think you can on that.
Damn it.
We got a timer.
Would you like mine?
Yeah.
What was the order? Sorry.
Case. Counterplan to set. Okay. Is everybody good? The plan does three things to reinvigorate the due process clause at the federal level. First, it does a due process claims that will enable stricter regulations of plea bargaining that establishes what renders a plea involuntary in determining whether defendants receive a meaningful opportunity to present a complete defense. Secondly, transparency requirements provide oversight and streamline the opportunities for due process regulation. And then thirdly, a uniform sentencing discount coupled with due process rights regulations shift the balance of power, offering an opportunity to reduce prosecutors' return from bargains while increasing resources to decrease plea rates. That's key to sustainable solvency. They extended a couple of arguments on case that really make no sense. The first argument is that they know the root cause as to why people plea, as to like why innocent people in like plea bargains and stuff, but their evidence does not talk about studies that have cited that innocent people plead to plea bargains because of the fact that they want to go home and that they're risk adverse and more likely to plead to this. They have no studies that cite this, but ours is empirical evidence that actually cites people who pled guilty when they were innocent. That definitely means that they don't like that innocent people are put away next. They make these arguments that monitoring doesn't solve, but they don't explain how monitoring doesn't solve. Monitoring definitely solves because it provides oversight and streamlines the opportunities for due process regulation. And next they say that our evidence is only in the context of negative coercion, but they don't explain why positive coercion is a good thing. Coercion is bad. It takes away people's autonomy, and it also requires them to plead guilty to the things that they're not guilty to, which definitely strips the autonomy and means that the counterclaim doesn't solve either. Go there now. The first argument I'm going to extend is that it's still, back on case, all of their arguments are in the context as if we were banning plea bargaining, but we're not banning plea bargaining, we're restricting plea bargaining. So none of it actually talks about restrictions. Go on to the counter plan. Number one, I'm going to still say that it still allows for coercion, which is a bad thing. They have not said why positive coercion is good. And they've also not talked about how the unbundling of criminal trial rights prevents the imbalance of power. They say that it's because they give like positive like plea bargaining skills to the defendants, but that doesn't mean anything because they don't like stop plea bargaining. They don't stop prosecutors from actually coercing people into taking plea bargains when they're innocent. This like argument makes no sense. There's no conceded internal net benefit because they don't stop like innocent people from going to jail. They have no like it just makes no, their solvency makes no sense. It definitely doesn't avoid court clog because the Rappaport evidence says that court clog is already happening now in the status quo. Even if they shift to the stain, it doesn't matter because their dissad's non-unique. Next, they say that they extend the due process disad. They definitely still coerce people into taking plea bargains, even if they're conditional or better plea bargains. There's no such thing as a better coercion, which means that you should err affirmative on this question. And they definitely definitely don't strengthen autonomy just because you give them another choice. It's still like choosing to take away your lives, basically, so it doesn't matter. I'm gonna go ahead and send perm do both. We can definitely increase restrictions on plea bargaining while unbundling criminal rights. It's not, and it's also not a question of T. Don't allow them to garner offense on that next go to the dissad. The first argument I'm going to extend is for cross-examination. They have proven that it's not unique with the rapport evidence, but they have dropped a very big straight turn on this dissad, which is going to be the reason we win here. They have dropped that we spill over to broader criminal justice reform, which means that we can ease the burden on the courts, such as marijuana legalization, things like that. That means that we open up the courts and we don't cause court fog at all. They have dropped this link turn, which means that you have to vote affirmative.
Unbundling. Unbundling counterclaim, the court quality disadvantage, and then other cases.
So counterpoint this side or just?
Counterclaim decide. Is everybody ready? Counterclaim decide case. Okay. The negative wins this round because the unbundling counterclaim is able to ameliorate of the act while avoiding the court clogging net benefit. And even if the act is correct that the 1AC is a good idea, you should still vote negative because the counterclaim is able to do the same function of the act by unbundling rights and trading them piecemeal, which avoids the link to the court clogged dissad since it does not result in a massive amount of trials like the 1AC. They've conceded all of the 2&C analysis. Their only pushback is about positive coercion, but this doesn't make sense because the CP fixes coercion. We have already won on case that innocents do not accept pleas because they want the most fair outcome, or win at trial because they believe their own innocence. And yes, it's able to avoid the court clogged dissad. The counterclaim makes plea bargains faster and lowers the burden on the court system, like accepting 6 jurors rather than 12, which makes it so that there are 50% less resources involved in any individual trial. The last argument they have is the perm, but they have conceded the analysis that I did in the 2&C about how the two are mutually exclusive, because the counterclaim decreases restrictions on plea bargains, whereas the affirmative increases restrictions on plea bargains. The two are not able to be reconciled with one another. Jays, I hope that you're okay. Your face looks worrying. The dissad. The DA comes first. Even without a counterclaim, you can still vote negative on the dissad. The affirmative creates a crash in the court system because of an expansion towards trial cases rather than plea bargains. 97% of the status quo is represented by plea deals, which is much better because it keeps the courts unclogged. Even if only a small percent start going to trial rather than pleas, that means that 1, the act doesn't solve anything since they have to reduce pleas to solve, or 2, even just a few is sufficient. A single court case takes up to 50 hours to litigate from a prosecutor, which makes it impossible to deal with other issues. We have won the argument that innocents will not take the plea bargain, but instead go to trial. That means that whenever there is a court clog, it makes it impossible for them to go to trial, which causes them to be in jail forever because lots of individuals do not have the resources to be able to pay for high numbers of cash bail or the high number or the high cost of cash bails, which means that they stay in jail until their trial actually occurs. The last argument they have is that there is a spillover claim here to broader criminal justice reform. But 1, the 1AC evidence does not specifically talk about how it's able to do things like marijuana legalization, which means that you should be highly skeptical of the 1AR analysis that says that they're able to resolve it. And 2, they have not explained in the context of the dissad why criminal justice reform is going to occur writ large, what the criminal justice reform looks like, or how the criminal justice reform will actually be able to resolve the court clog that is happening right now. The final argument they have is that there is no brink and that the dissad is non-unique. But we have agreed that the court system is backed up right now. The only difference is that the affirmative makes it way worse. So whereas in the status quo, there may be 1 or 2 people waiting their trial because of long delays in the court system, the affirmative makes it so that there are 100 or 200 people who are waiting for the trials to actually occur, which is obviously net worse and is the entire impact. I'll do the case debate now. First, I'm going to extend that there is no innocent probability. We have the most real world because we actually use people who believe that they're innocent, whereas the AF is hypothetical studies where people inside of actual like science labs and things are asking people, would you accept a plea bargain if you got to go home faster? Which isn't indicative of what the real world actually looks like, because those kinds of things are never actual life or death decisions, whereas in the real world, they are refusing to accept plea bargains because they view it as unfair and lying. The second argument and final that I'll answer is that there is no coercion. It's a problem with the entire system that's not specific to plea bargaining, because please help fight against the power balance, because it gives defendants another way to fight against bad prosecutors, whereas the AF restricts those. Thanks. Go ahead.
The case.
Behind.
It'll be the case, the counter plan, and then the disadvantage. Is everyone good? Cool. This is the third negative speech that they have conceded that the affirmative is sufficiently solves the problem of plea bargaining through three reasons. The first is the due process claims enable stricter regulation of plea bargains, which establishes what renders pleas involuntary in determining whether defendants receive a meaningful opportunity to present a complete defense. The second, and most important, is transparency requirements provide oversight and streamline the opportunities for due process regulation. And the third is a uniform sentencing discount coupled with the due process regulation shifts the balance of power, offering an opportunity to reduce prosecutor return from bargains while increasing resources to decrease plea rates, which is necessary for sustainable solvency and resolving issues of mass incarceration. They have not highlighted on the issue of solvency, which means if we win that plea bargains are bad by any stretch of the imagination, you should feel comfortable voting for a plan that can resolve that crisis now. I'll go to their two main arguments here is that one, the innocence problem, that people don't believe they're innocent and they'll actually just go ahead and go through the trial process, but they have ignored a uniqueness problem with the that the defendants are risk adverse. Diagnostically results indicate that the real world defendants are more vulnerable in the negotiation process than almost any other stage in the process. Think about it. If you commit if you commit a crime or being told you're guilty from a crime, and someone with more education about the criminal justice system says, oh, you're going to be screwed in this process if you do not take this plea bargain, you're more likely to take the plea bargain process even if you're innocent, because you fear that the court will rule against you because you don't have enough, because of the power imbalance inherent within that court system. This next argument was about coercion, but the plea bargains are inherently coercive, proven by the analysis I've given above. We've read a piece of Finley evidence that says that wrongful convictions have risen from 22 to 44% over the past multiple decades, and due to also this is discounted due to the lack of transparency within the system, which means you should feel comfortable voting voting for affirmation to establish a more transparent, just criminal justice system. Let's go to their counterplan. I'm going to highlight that their main argument is that it avoids the net benefit because they can go from 12 to 6 jurors, and that reduces 50% of the jurors, not the entire amount of resources. If court cases take 50 hours in the status quo, what it's going to take 49 hours when they remove the last 6 jurors to have to decide on the decision. It's not going to be a substantial fix to the status quo. And in fact, they've already established that it enhances plea bargains in the status quo. And we have said that those are bad on net face, even if they're a more glorified plea bargain. They are not sufficiently solving the problem with the system of plea bargains itself. They have dropped a unique disadvantage to this counterplan, that there's no chance of inroads to the criminal justice reform term that we've read on the disadvantage. The one Capers and Turner transparency evidence specifically talks about how the plan enables criminal justice reform through data collection and by rebalancing the power dynamic, and unbundling fails to do that. They have not even made the claim about how they increase transparency in the status quo. They just make plea bargains more efficient, which just exacerbates the problem we have already outlined in the status quo. Even if you cannot permute both, even if you cannot
they're mutually exclusive with the plan, we have said that on net plea bargains are bad, and they are saying they're on net good. And we've read multiple pieces of evidence on how they're coercive, which is the reason you should reject the counter plan. I'll go to the dissent now. I'm going to sit on this straight term because they've massively mishandled it. We've made a broader claim about how the one is see how plea bargains cause a load of intransparency within the system, which leads to problems with the broader criminal justice reform. The lack of data about plea bargaining frustrates efforts towards evidence-based criminal justice reform because people do not know if the evidence is true or not due to the lack of transparency. Think about all the problems they've cited and how people will be stuck in prison forever due to high cash bail, which is another problem within the criminal justice reform. We are the only plan that seeks to reduce that in the status quo and offer more inroads to criminal justice reform so we can remove things like cash bail.
All right, thank you all.